Hello, how are you? Hope you all are well. Hello, hello. It is straight up 2 o'clock. I am going to give a moment or two in case anybody's going to join us that isn't already here, and then we can get started. Welcome to my office. This is a new day and a new part of the house that I am visiting you from. Um, got a new name for this. Lots of new things going on. So I'll fill you all in just a minute. Again, if you're watching this with me, say hello, drop your name in the chat if you want, so that I know that you're here. All right. Thanks for checking in. I'm going to give it another 15 seconds or so in case people are still showing up. And then we'll get going. It's funny, I'm looking in the background. I don't usually watch my screen this much, but I'm looking in the background and I'm realizing how very lovely my husband's wall looks because we share an office. All right, let me get my notes. Those notes is how I make sure that these chats are really only 20 minutes long. And we can get going. Why is that not working? Huh. All right. Notes, nope, not happening. Okay. So again, whoa, things are popping all over the place. Okay. You know, it's funny, what I'm trying to learn how to do here is to be aware of people joining, because this is live and that's the point, and also to be able to keep an eye on chat and still be able to see what I wanted to talk to you about. There we go. All right, welcome. Welcome to the newly renamed little chat. We're calling this Thinking Out Loud, and it is ideas for leaders who value clarity over noise. I want to just say welcome and thanks for dropping in. My name is Chris Quintana. I am a martial arts master, a certified high performance coach, a brain injury survivor, and, well, a nerd. So thanks for joining me this afternoon as we think out loud about clarity. We're going to be talking about clarity all month for the month of February. And specifically right now, we are going to be talking about getting clarity on noticing who you are now. I think clarity is one of my favorite topics in high performance coaching. It's incredibly important for high performers. You would probably notice that people who consider themselves high performers have really, really excellent clarity about who they are, about the kinds of people they want to have in their life, about how they want to show up for those people. They're very clear on what it is that makes them successful. They have a plan and a mission, and they know who they are. And I think having that clarity, among other things for me, what it does is it helps me stay on track. It helps me know what's in and what's out, and create better boundaries around the work that I'm doing and the way that I'm living my life. And usually when people talk about clarity, we think of things like goals and direction and next step. But today what I want to talk about is kind of a quieter kind of clarity, and that has to come first, because before you decide where you're going, it matters who you actually think you are. And what I'm talking about today is not about fixing anything. It's just about noticing when and how you might still be operating from an earlier season in your life. So if you've gone through a hard season, whether that had to do with businesses or maybe a health issue, or the chaos in the world can sometimes have that impact. When you've come out of when you go through a hard season, we have this habit of just narrowing the scope. We narrow how we show up and how much we do. And this narrowing and consolidating is intelligent. It's important. So for example, if you're in a season where cash is really tight, spending less makes sense. That's kind of a narrowing of your budget. If you are dealing with burnout, either heading towards or just coming out of burnout, you might downshift everything you're doing and do a little bit less and prioritize sleep and time out in nature and worry less about productivity for a while. And that's intelligence. You also might, if you've had a mistake that had really painful consequences, you might be a little slower in some of your decision making. And that would be intelligence. So when we talk about narrowing, it's not that you become or became less capable. It's just that you got a little bit more precise. And that precision sometimes can become who you believe you are, right? Like the adaptation works so well that it quietly becomes permanent. And that's usually subtle and often not conscious, and sometimes leads us to places where we didn't really want to end up. Really good example of that is what happened with me with my last concussion. Um, it was 20, oh my goodness, I forgot the date. I'm so excited about that. 2017, July of 2017, I was in a car accident. I got one too many concussions. Well, I got one, it was my one too many concussion. I had really bad persistent concussion symptoms. And without nerding out about all of the neuroscience of what happens with a concussion, I will tell you that there are people who know a lot about treating concussions will talk about, I think it's 7 different phenotypes of how concussion symptoms show up. And I had like 5 or 6 of them. So I had trouble with words. I had trouble regulating my emotions. I had trouble making my eyes track properly. I had trouble with my vestibular system. It was causing anxiety. There were a lot of different pieces of it. And immediately after the accident, it was 16, 18 hours of sleep. Even if I didn't want to, I would be up and fall asleep in the middle of the fall asleep watching television, reading a book, listening to something. It didn't matter. I would just like fall asleep because my brain was healing. And then over the years after that, there were a lot of levels that I had to learn to deal with. And as each thing healed, my world opened up a little bit more. But the problem was, I didn't always know it was okay or that it was safe. So, one of my long term experiences was when I pushed too hard, I'd start feeling really good and I'd want to do more because I wanted to be more like I used to be. And so I would overdo it and I would use way too many spoons that day or points, however you're tracking your energy. I would drain my battery and crash. And it would take days and days and days and days to recover from it. And that was really a problem because I was running my school and I needed to be teaching. And if I started showing up at the school and then I was there one day and gone for 3 days, that just didn't look very good. And so I got really, really strict about what I did on certain days and allowing time to recover and planning my life around recovery, which in those early days was super, super important. And in some ways is still not a bad thing to be able to manage, oh, I'm going to need this much time. I'm going to take this much time. It's going to use this much energy. Recovery time is a good thing. But it got to the point where I was so conservative and I was so worried about that I just wouldn't do anything, right? So what happened was I took this, I learned that if I overdid it, I would shut down. And after a lifetime of saying, oh, I can sleep later, I can sleep later, the new rule that I had to live of was do not, under any circumstances, overdo it. And this wasn't fear, it was wisdom, because it was protecting the real honest capacity of what I actually had at the time. And it was a good thing when it happened, right? And so I see this like founders post burnout who learned that less is always safer. Same kind of thing, right? Doing less is always safer. Or an entrepreneur building a new business after bankruptcy who thinks, oh, I'm not risking debt ever again. This kind of narrowing, like we talked about before, is a survival mechanism, and it's not wrong and it's not bad. The issue is at some point we stopped checking whether the rule was still true. And so I found myself maybe a year ago still thinking, I can't teach, I can't be on the mat, I get overwhelmed. And a friend of mine said, why don't you just come and hang out at my school? No pressure, you don't have to teach, you don't have to do anything, but just come hang out and see what it is. And I discovered not only was I capable of being in that environment, but I felt more myself and more aligned and connected with me, my best me by being there. And so now I'm teaching again, but I would not have known if I wasn't willing to step out of that. And so we get to this point where we're just, the issue is not the narrowing in the first place. It's the when that takes over and we can't adjust from it. And part of what happens then is that often that first rule will create a second one. So in addition to, oh, I need to manage my energy, I also have the rule of I can't be in certain environments. And so that all sort of snowballed. And again, like I was talking about, I've seen this before. I see this in business as well. I mentioned starting a new business after bankruptcy. I actually know someone who did file for bankruptcy a few years back after a company had failed. And they didn't, in that original company, they didn't have a clear business plan. They didn't really know the industry as well as they thought. Honestly, they didn't have a great working business model. They just kept throwing more money at the problem. Suddenly the business went under and it kind of took them with them. And it was a bad decision with real consequences. And the result of that was that being more careful and being more accurate became survival for them moving forward after that experience. And so how it shows up now is as they've started building their next business, the rule for security, right? The rule of, oh, I can't go into debt. I need to be more careful. I need to have this accuracy. I need to know. It led to analysis paralysis and overthinking the business plan and waiting for certainty and wanting to build with zero financial risk. And not surprisingly, they struggled and felt frustrated. And the problem was they were avoiding things that aren't actually dangerous anymore, just like I was avoiding things that weren't actually dangerous anymore. And looking at caution as maturity. And so even though the cost had changed, that internal rule didn't. So when you're careful, when you're avoiding mistakes, it can feel safe and competent to want to hold things close and to be just more cautious. And you can see that in business too, like a CEO who only executes, or someone who doesn't want bigger visibility. They don't want their role to expand, or for thinking, well, this is just how I operate now. And like I was saying before with me, I had all of these rules about what I was capable of doing. And one of them was do not work a 40-hour work week. And I had this story in my head for years that this was the best I could do and it was never going to change. And at some point I didn't question it. And I remember, here's the thing, I remember 2 years into this injury swearing I was never going to compromise, that I wasn't going to let myself get smaller. I was going to get back to what I want. I remember this, and I remember a conversation with one of my people that was helping me heal, saying to her, how do I know if I'm actually improving or if I've just learned to live sub-threshold? And at that time, it was the scariest thought I could think of, was to start thinking I'm better. But really what happened was, instead of living up here, I was down here because I was sub-symptom, and that just started to look like normal life. And I really hadn't realized I was doing that in my life until, excuse me, until I was back on the mat and I felt fine. And so what I didn't pause to contemplate is what I'm inviting you to consider today, is this rule that's running in my head from whatever it is. It might be any of the examples I gave you before. It might be something smaller, but those rules that are in your head, have you ever, the invitation is to stop and ask yourself, was this always true? Or did it become true at a time when I needed my range to shrink? And so really the invitation is to just start noticing those rules that are defining you right now, and to be curious about where they came from and whether or not they still serve you. Noticing is not a decision. It's not expansion. It's accuracy and curiosity. And you don't have to undo anything. They may still be serving you really, really well. You just want to see them clearly. We're talking about clarity. You want to know with certainty and with clarity if who you are and how you're showing up in the world is the best you're capable of, or if maybe you're living sub-threshold for some reason. And it's not a judgment. You don't have to change anything. I did some work a couple years ago with someone who does somatic experiencing, and it was such a new concept for me that we can be curious without needing to change anything. And I think that's so, so important when we're looking at growing, is I'm not doing this work in order to heal. Well, I am doing the work in order to heal. I'm not healing in order to change. I might change because I heal. But it's not about I need to change. It's not about I have to do something different. And it's certainly not about I'm doing something wrong. What it's about is awareness and clarity. And so when we approach with curiosity, we get to see things more clearly. And the more clearly we see and understand who we are, not just who we want to be. I spend a lot of time with my clients striving for the best version of ourselves and trying to identify what that is. But this path from where I am today to that best version of me doesn't have to be steep, right? It doesn't have to be this. It can be really, really gentle. And it can also be flat with a little bit and then flat with a little bit. It can be whatever it is. It's not about instantly changing and correcting something. It's really just about recognizing what are my patterns? Where did they come from? What was the purpose they originally served? And is that purpose still necessary today? And so, again, thinking about my brain injury and recovering from that, the rules about paying attention to how much energy I'm expending, being super strict, those don't apply to me anymore. But learning to pay attention to signs that I'm overdoing it before I have symptoms of having overdone it is something that still serves me well. Because there are times when I go days without getting enough sleep, or I'm working on a big project and I'm going, and I suddenly start to recognize I'm losing words. I'm leaving cabinets open. That's a big tell. My husband has to tell me I'm doing it, but I leave cabinet doors open. Little things like that. Learning to recognize those still helps me, even though I don't need to do it on a daily or weekly basis. It's still a good habit. So we're not talking about chucking it all out. It's just looking at being really, really clear on where did it come from? What's its purpose? Is that still serving me? Is there an adjustment that needs, or is it perfectly right? Because the beauty of having clarity about who you are now is that you get to choose in any given moment how you want to respond. And so remember that this week is not about change. It's just about attention. Because before we expand back out, it really helps to notice who we think we are and which rules we're still living by that once kept us safe, but might not be needed anymore. So that's the invitation. Just notice. No decisions, no change, just notice. Was this always true, or did it become true when my range had to shrink? So this week, this whole month, we're going to be staying with clarity. Not to rush movement, but to make sure movement is honest. So I hope you'll join me next week as we think out loud about how the rules you once needed to survive or succeed can still quietly shape how you lead and how you show up for others. Thanks for stopping by and have a fantastic afternoon.